All right, today we're diving into a pretty provocative and, honestly, a deeply counterintuitive internet philosophy. It's called intelligent retardmaxing. Now, it's a challenging term for sure, and our goal here is just to explain the logic behind it, piece by piece, exactly as it's presented in the source material. So, let's see what this is all about.
So let's start with the question at the very core of this whole thing. What if giving up, deciding to stop trying when the odds just feel impossible, isn't a failure of will, but is actually an intelligent choice? It's a pretty radical idea, and it's really the key to understanding this entire way of thinking.
And that brings us to this quote that just perfectly sums up the concept. You have to be intelligent enough to not rely on your intelligence. I mean, it sounds like a total paradox, doesn't it? But according to this philosophy, it's all about understanding the limits of your own rational mind.
Okay, so let's break that down. Section 1, a provocative new idea. We're going to look at what the source material actually means by this term.
So the source defines it as prioritizing those intuitive signals from your heart and gut over the logical, goal-oriented thinking of your prefrontal cortex. The idea isn't to be less intelligent, but to value a different, more primal kind of intelligence that operates way beyond conscious thought. This chart really frames the core conflict perfectly. On one side, you have the mind. It's rational, it's logical, it's all about achieving goals. And on the other side, you have the body, running on intuition, instinct, and what the source calls a coping response. This entire philosophy is basically an argument for choosing the right side of this chart, for trusting your gut over your brain.
Now, to illustrate this point, the source material leans really heavily on a classic psychological experiment, but it gives it a completely radical reinterpretation. This is where the argument really starts to build.
Okay, so here's the experiment. First, rats are put in a situation with stress they absolutely cannot escape. Later, these same rats are placed in a new challenge, a tank of water that a normal rat could swim in for days. But these rats, they give up and drown in just a few minutes. This phenomenon is famously known as learned helplessness.
But here's the crucial detail the researcher Kurt Richter discovered. Just before giving up, the rats' hearts dramatically slowed down. This wasn't panic. It was the exact opposite. It was a sign of the vagal nerve secreting a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, and that chemical is going to be central to this entire argument.
So the conventional interpretation is that the rat's will was just broken. They learned to be helpless. But the source material asks a different question. Was this a failure of will, or was it a perfectly logical prediction based on what they'd already been through? And this right here is the core of the reinterpretation. The source argues the rats weren't helpless. They were intelligent. They were performing pattern recognition. Their experience taught them that trying to escape only leads to failure. So, facing a new trap, their system simply predicted another failure and initiated a shutdown. It's a grim but efficient form of logic. This whole shutdown response leads us directly into neurochemistry. So, section 3, the coping chemical. Let's take a closer look at the role of acetylcholine. Acetylcholine, or ACH, is a major neurotransmitter. And in this philosophy, it's kind of cast as the chemical of coping. It's what the vagal nerve uses to calm the heart, and it's also what the source links to the body's reaction to long-term, inescapable stress. So acetylcholine seems to play a dual role here. On one hand, it has a calming effect, lowering your heart rate. But under intense stress, it triggers this coping response that's linked to passivity. The source argues this isn't a malfunction. It's the body's default setting for when it's in an unwinnable situation. And to back this up, the source points to Martin Seligman himself, the pioneer of learned helplessness research. In a fascinating twist, Seligman later proposed that this passivity isn't learned at all. He argued it's the default, unlearned reaction to stress. What we actually learn, he says, is how to overcome it. So, if passivity is the default, what turns it off? Well, that brings us to the next, and maybe the most surprising piece of this puzzle. Section 4. An enzyme and testosterone, and a surprising connection. Meet cholinesterase. This enzyme's job is to break down acetylcholine. So if ACH enables that passive coping state, cholinesterase is the off switch. The source provocatively calls it anti-thinking because it shuts down that passive state, clearing the way for active behavior. The source cites a study where researchers gave rats a drug that inhibited this enzyme, cholinesterase. And the result? The helpless rats became even more passive. By blocking the off switch, they were effectively locked in that high acetylcholine coping state. And now we get to the most jarring claim, the one that links this entire process to the endocrine system. The source, referencing a specific study, states it plainly. Castrate a man, and his cholinesterase levels instantly plummet. So the crucial conclusion drawn by the source is this. The off switch for the passive coping state, that cholinesterase enzyme, is dependent on testosterone. According to this logic, low testosterone means low cholinesterase, and that leaves acetylcholine levels high, locking the system in a default state of passive coping. Okay, we've covered a lot. Rat experiments, neurotransmitters, enzymes, and hormones. So, Section 5, the philosophy. Let's tie it all together.
So here is the entire argument in a nutshell. Step 1. Inescapable stress triggers a default passive state via acetylcholine. Step 2. This philosophy reframes that passivity as intelligent pattern recognition. Step 3. An enzyme cholinesterase acts as the off switch for that passivity. Step 4. That off switch is claimed to be dependent on testosterone. And the final takeaway is a philosophy that elevates this intuitive, gut-level response over rational, goal-driven action.
To lend this modern internet idea a sense of historical weight, the source brings up Aristotle, suggesting he believed the brain's main purpose was just to cool the passions of the heart. It's an attempt to connect this elevation of instinct over logic to some ancient philosophical thought. Which leaves us with the final, provocative question at the heart of this whole philosophy. Is the ultimate form of intelligence not about solving the problem, but about knowing when it's time to stop thinking, stop trying, and simply listen to the body's oldest and most primal signal?